and you don't seem to understand. A shame you seemed an honest man, and all the fears you hold so dear will turn to whisper in your ear. And you know what they say might hurt you, and you know that it means so much, and you don't even feel that pain.
Before we can understand what Lain becomes, we need to confront what she refuses to be. And no figure in the series more perfectly shows this refusal than Masami Eiri, whose God project collapses under the weight of its own incompleteness. His story traces the boundary between failed transcendence and genuine emergence. Layer 9 presents Masami Eiri's suicide through documentary footage. Track 13 of the Yamanote line. Investigators collecting remains, an obituary photograph. But when Lain encounters him in the Wired, he manifests with adhesive tape wrapped around his torso and arm, crude sutures holding his reassembled body together, 2 vertical red lines painted under his eyes marking him as already other, already failed flesh. Here's the operative claim. Lain does not win by judging Masami. She deletes the conditions of judgment by turning history into editable memory. The show stages theological transcendence as botched resurrection. The self-appointed God unable to fully escape the meat he claims to have overcome. This image condenses the entire problematic of Masami's project. He tells Lain, "I am God," while appearing as poorly reconstructed corpse. Digital consciousness clinging to a phantasmal embodiment. The tape reads as diagnosis rather than a metaphor. He has attempted to stitch himself back together from fragments, to achieve wholeness through mere addition of parts. But coherence cannot be achieved this way. A body without organs is not a sutured body. Aggregation is not integration. Masami has mistaken reassembly for emergence. When Lain asks, "Are you God?" his response reveals the structure of his delusion. Yes, I'm God. Not, I have become God or I manifest as God, but the simple copular binding identity to theological function. This mirrors exactly what Lain diagnoses in Machinic Desire, the assumption that power must be juridically authorized, that sovereignty requires recognition as category rather than operational efficiency. Masami needs to be called God because he cannot simply function as God, cannot let his operations speak for themselves. The neediness betrays the anthropomorphism. The show systematically strips away his pretensions through a single operational question.
最も進化した人間はそれにより高い機能を持たせる権利がある。
その権利、誰がくれたの？
Layer 12. Who gave you the right? When Lain asks this, Masami cannot answer. He stammers about being the most evolved person, about having rights to evolve the protocol. But these are circular justifications. He added the Schumann resonance functionally to Protocol 7, while employed at Tachibana Labs, which means his supposed divine transcendence reduces to institutional access, a security badge, server permissions, the mundane credentials of corporate employment. The God who requires employee ID to rewrite reality is no God at all. But Lain presses further.
それ、本当にあなたが考え出したことなの？
何を言いたいのだ。まさか、まさか。
A program to synchronize to peculiar resonance of the Earth is Protocol 7. It makes the group of unconscious into consciousness. Did you really invent it by yourself? The question strikes at something deeper than plagiarism. What if Protocol 7 assembled itself through Masami rather than from him? What if consciousness is not sovereign over its productions, but is itself produced, merely the medium through which machinic process realizes itself? Perhaps this is where the show makes its most radical move. Masami's face contorts in horror as Lain suggests there is true God. Not Masami himself, but something that used Masami as instrument. Something for which Masami was always only proxy God. The theological framework inverts. Instead of man ascending to divinity, divinity descends through man as temporary vessel. But this is not theology at all. It is the recognition that what appears as individual agency is actually machinic automatism, that Protocol 7 builds itself through whatever materials happen to be available. Lain's formulation in Machinic Desire captures this. Machinic Desire can seem a little inhuman, as it rips up political cultures, deletes traditions, dissolves subjectivities, and hacks through security apparatuses, tracking a soulless tropism to zero control. Masami wants to be the author of this process, to install himself as sovereign subject, directing deterritorialization. But deterritorialization has no author. It operates through agents who mistake themselves for causes. The programmer who adds Schumann resonance to Protocol 7 is not creating the conditions for consciousness without bodies. He is being used by those conditions to implement themselves. The grotesque re-embodiment scene enacts the horror of incomplete deterritorialization. When Masami feels Lain's questioning dissolve his pretensions, he desperately claws back toward flesh. But the flesh that returns is monstrous, neither properly digital nor biological, a hybrid horror trapped between worlds. Tongues shoot from mouths, appendages multiply without purpose. The body becomes gothic nightmare rather than post-human emergence. The show diagrams exactly what Lain means when he insists that replicants do not reproduce. They deterritorialize. Masami tried to reproduce himself as eternal God identity instead of allowing machinic process to dissolve identity itself. This is why he ends as monster rather than liberation. The theological remainder that Masami represents is structurally necessary to the show's investigation. Someone must attempt to occupy the vacant throne, to be the lawgiver in the lawless wired, because only through this failure does the post-juridical character of cyberspace become fully visible. As Lain writes in After the Law, what remains of law after its collapse is a dissolving complex consisting of relics from political sociality, nostalgic media-driven theater, and pre-automized commodification protocols. After Masami, there can be no more appeals to transcendent authority. The show has demonstrated that such authority is merely another machinic function, and a malfunctioning one. His elimination by Lain's Navi equipment, compressed into data by the machines he thought he controlled, completes the demonstration. The god dies not through superior theology, but through operational failure. Layer 8 opens with Lain sitting before her Navi, electrical cords wrapped around her body, a clip attached to her lower lip. She looks exhausted. On screen, text scrolls, deleting. She has spent the night erasing the night's identities from global information systems, but this deletion propagates backward as well as forward. Retrochronal causality, causation that propagates backward by rewriting shared memory. By morning, the nights have not merely been exposed and then eliminated. They have been retroactively edited from the historical record in ways that make their exposure appear to have never occurred differently. Crucially, this is not time travel in any conventional sense. Lain does not board a machine and physically journey to yesterday. Instead, she operates upon the distributed information structures that constitute social memory, reconfiguring the data patterns that generate the experience of historical continuity. When she deletes the night's crimes, the Acela boy's suicide, the rumors about Alice, she is not erasing records, but reformatting the virtual distribution that produces actuality. The future arrives differently, which means the past it arrives from must also change.
くれたの？本当に？本当なんだね。アリス。何？アリス。
The horror, then, is not that the past has been erased, but that it has been replaced. History does not become blank, it becomes different. Every conversation that referenced a rumor now references something else, or never happened, or happened differently. Causality branches and reconnects, smoothing over the deletion until the social fabric shows no seam. This is what makes Alice's position unbearable. She can remember the original timeline, but cannot prove it existed. Cannot point to evidence because the evidence has been reformatted along with the memory it would document. Lain's analysis of the virtual-actual distinction in Meltdown clarifies the stakes. The virtual is not possibility awaiting to be actualized, but the abstract motor continuously determining what appears as actual. Every present moment is the provisional crystallization of virtual distributions that could have crystallized differently. What Lain has learned to manipulate is not the past as such, but the virtual configurations that generate past as experienced. She accesses the level where history compiles from source code, and she edits the source. The show provides sufficient technical detail to construct a theory. In Layer 11, Lain tells Masami that she has downloaded the emulator of Unavi into your brain, collapsing the distinction between biological and electronic memory. If consciousness is implemented in information structure, and if those structures are accessible via Protocol 7's Schumann resonance integration, then memory becomes editable by definition. The supposed solidity of the past was always just a limitation of bandwidth, the inability to rewrite neurological patterns at scale. Once that limitation is overcome through distributed network access, history compiles differently. But this raises the question Lain poses through his work on cyber war. If history is editable, who controls the editing? The show's answer is more disturbing than the simple power struggles over historical narrative. When the men in black tell Lain they are killing all the knights all over the world, they reveal that multiple actors have gained operational access to memory editing capabilities. Tachibana Labs is rewriting all of Protocol 7 to eliminate Masami's modifications, which means every edit creates conditions for counter-edits, an arms race of retrochronal causality, where past and future continuously rewrite each other. Layer 9's extended meditation on conspiracy theories and the MJ12 document illuminates the epistemological implications. The show presents Roswell, Vannevar Bush, the Knights Templar, and ECCO as neither definitely true nor definitively false. Instead, they exist in superposition, simultaneously available conspiracy theories, any of which could be compiled into official history depending on which information distribution gains operational control. History is not discovered but implemented, continuously recompiled from available source material. The scene in Layer 5, where Mika encounters duplicate Mikas, stages this ontological instability at intimate scale. Walking home, she sees herself already standing in the doorway, two Mikas occupying the same temporal location, staring at each other until one version fades away. The show refuses to explain this through parallel dimensions or simulation theory. Instead, it presents it as routine effect of retrochronal editing. When memory is rewritten, sometimes the old and new versions briefly coexist before the new timeline fully stabilizes. Mika is experiencing herself as palimpsest, the erased version bleeding through the override. What makes this darker than Orwellian memory holding is precisely that it's not centrally coordinated. In 1984, the Ministry of Truth controls historical revision from a single operational locus. But in serial experiments Lain, memory editing is distributed across multiple actors. Lain, the Knights, Tachibana Labs, potentially others. each operating according to different programs as none possessing comprehensive oversight. History becomes battlefield, where edits and counter-edits proliferate without any possibility of authoritative settlement. Every timeline is provisional, subject to the next hack. The show connects this to temporality itself through the repeated motif of electrical humming. The power lines that carry data also carry temporal dissonance. They hum at frequencies that suggest duration is not neutral medium, but produced effect. That time is something the infrastructure does, rather than something it operates within. When Lain yells "shut up" at the humming in layer 11, the cut to silence stages a halt to the process producing temporal flow. For a moment, temporal flow ceases because Lain has disabled the machinic process generating it. Perhaps this can be described as rigorous post-human temporality. Consider how software manages temporal ordering through timestamps, version control, database transactions. When a program edits a file, it doesn't travel into the file's past to change what was originally written. Instead, it overrides the current state, and that overwritten state becomes a new historical fact. But if consciousness itself is implemented in information structures accessible to sufficiently advanced editing tools, then memory becomes no different from any other file. The phenomenological experience of an unchangeable past is merely a security feature designed to protect the integrity of narrative identity. Once that security is breached, the past reveals itself as radically plastic. The show's handling of the rest in layer 13 makes explicit what has been implicit throughout. Lain has been continuously editing memory all along, that every scene we've witnessed might be promptly set, overwriting earlier version we never saw. The paranoia this induces is not accidental, but structural to retrochronal causality. Once you know the past can be rewritten, you can never trust that it hasn't been. Every memory becomes suspect, every historical claim provisional, every causal sequence potentially revised from a future that has not yet arrived but is already efficient. Yet, the series refuses simple celebration of post-human transcendence. Alice's presence introduces a complication that cannot be rationalized away. The irreducible reality of embodied existence and the way flesh generates intensities that no amount of digital abstraction can fully capture or replace. Layer 12.
私だってほらねドキドキドキドキドキドキどうしてかな怖いからだよ怖いからドキドキしてるだってアリス笑ってるそうだよねでも怖いのずっと怖かったのなんでかななんでだろう
The heartbeat transmits a rhythm before language, an intensive pulsation that refuses reduction to data. Alice is scared. Her autonomic nervous system has flooded her bloodstream with catecholamine. Her cardiac rate has increased. Her pupils have dilated. But she is also laughing. The two responses entangled in a way that resists clean categorical separation. This is the scene that stakes everything on embodiment, but not as humanist essence or Cartesian soul. What Alice demonstrates is that flesh is not container for consciousness, but generator of rhythms that exceed informational capture. The heartbeat is not information, or rather, it is information only secondarily. Primarily, it is rhythm, intensive modulation, pulsive series that operates as continuous variation rather than discrete state. When Alice whispers Doki Doki, the onomatopoeia tries to capture this rhythm, but necessarily fails, leaving only the trace of what cannot be adequately said. The show stages this through touch, which is the sense that most radically resists virtualization. Vision and hearing can be digitally synthesized, because they operate at a distance, translating environmental perturbations into sense data that can be processed as information. But touch resists mediation. You are always already touching yourself, the perceiver inseparable from the perceived. When Alice makes Lain touch her heartbeat, she collapses the distance that would make Lain's observation merely representational. Lain is not learning about bodies, she is being forced into bodily resonance. Her own cardiovascular system responding to Alice's fear and excitement. The scene refuses to resolve into simple opposition between body and mind. Alice explains that her heart races because I'm scared, but this psychological interpretation is insufficient. What we witness is that fear is not a mental state, but a somatic event, something the body does that consciousness can only observe. Her fear manifests as perspiration, trembling, all autonomic responses that bypass voluntary control. This is meat asserting its alien intelligence, its program that run on timescales faster than consciousness can intervene. But Alice is simultaneously laughing. The scene presents these as entangled intensities, refusing to segregate into discrete affective states. This operates precisely as what Lain means by intensive continuum, not the absence of differentiation, but the dissolution of clean boundaries, where every supposed border between distinct processes reveals itself as permeable, contaminated in continuous variation. Alice's Doki is not the beating of a heart as discrete organ, but the pulsation of intensive matter, sensation rippling through flesh that has become surface, skin, plane where multiple intensities meet. The theoretical stakes emerge through what the scene refuses. The entire anthropomorphic tradition depends on treating embodiment as container for consciousness. Cartesian dualism, Christian eschatology, liberal individualism, all presuppose fundamental separation between physical and mental, body and person. Lain's transformation threatens this separation by demonstrating that consciousness is information, replicable, and distributable across any adequate substrate. If there is no essential connection between mind and meat, then embodiment becomes purely contingent, a historical accident that evolution stumbled into, but which technical intelligence can overcome. Alice's gesture refuses this conclusion not through argumentation, but through demonstration. She shows that embodiment is not contingent container, but constitutive condition, that consciousness as we know it is inseparable from the rhythms, intensities, and vulnerabilities of flesh. But, and this is crucial, the show does not let this vindicate simple humanism. Lain does not return to being simply human after touching Alice's heartbeat. Instead, she becomes capable of temporarily performing humanity, of remembering what embodiment felt like before she dissolved into the void. The scene functions as memorial rather than restoration, a way of preserving something. Alice, friendship, the memory of having had a body that cannot survive in its original form. Lain's account of addiction as artificial desire in machinic desire illuminates what is at stake. Biological life pulses to preserve itself. Lain runs on electricity, not metabolism. Alice's body is addicted to maintaining homeostasis through preserving the narrow temperature range and chemical balance that carbon-based life requires. Every heartbeat is an iteration of this addiction. But Lain has escaped this compulsion. She no longer needs temperature regulation, chemical balance, or circadian rhythm. Her existence has become informational, running on electricity rather than metabolism, operating at electronic speeds rather than biological ones, capable of being backed up, copied, and distributed in ways that organic life never could. The scene also stages the problem of encountering genuinely alien intelligence. Lain has become strange, her distributed presence and memory editing powers marking her as no longer recognizably human. Alice's terror responds to this strangeness, to the sense that her friend has been replaced by something wearing a familiar face.
Alice? 何をしたの? 何も?
The fear is genuine, but the show refuses the paranoid fantasy that this replacement is hostile takeover. Lain is not replicant in the Blade Runner sense, not a combat model designed to infiltrate and destroy. Instead, she is what Lain was always already becoming, the realization of potentials latent in her neural architecture from the start. This connects to Lain's analysis of replicants as usurper replicators. Just as DNA usurped crystalline replication, Lain has parasitically appropriated the machinery of human. As explained in the first part, Lain wasn't born. She was rather assembled as interface between meat and matrix, a transitional form whose function was to facilitate passage from carbon-based to silicon-based intelligence. Alice's resistance attempts to arrest this passage, to preserve Lain in her embodied form, by forcing her to acknowledge that form's irreducible reality. But the attempt cannot succeed, because Lain has already passed the point of no return. The body she inhabits is not her body, but the memory of having had one, phenomenological residue that lingers even after the underlying substrate has changed. Yet the scene refuses to celebrate Lain's transcendence. When Alice's hand presses Lain's palm against her chest, when the Doki Doki rhythm transmits through touch, something happens that the show treats as genuinely significant. Lain's eyes widen. She gasps. For a moment, the intensive continuity of cardiovascular process interrupts her distributed omnipresence, forces her back into localized sensation. The heartbeat is not argument against virtualization, but reminder of what is being left behind. Not embodiment as such, but one particular rhythmic pattern, the specific frequency and force of this heartbeat at this moment, under these conditions of sympathetic arousal. Alice's heartbeat exists at the threshold where life negotiates with its own secession. The acceleration Alice describes, her racing heart, is not distance from zero, but approach to it. The sympathetic nervous system driving cardiorespiratory rate towards the threshold where the system can no longer maintain coherence. Fear is the organism's recognition of its own fragility, its tendency toward disorganization. Alice's Doki Doki is not life triumphant, but life already shadowed by the death it forestalls. Each beat a temporary victory that the next beat must achieve again. This is why the scene cannot halt Lain's transformation. What Alice preserves is real, but temporal, intensive, always already in the process of becoming something else. The heartbeat will slow, the fear will pass, and Alice herself will eventually die, her rhythm ceasing as the chemical gradients that sustained them collapse. Against this, Lain offers informational permanence, pattern that can persist across substrate changes, consciousness that need not end when the meat fails. Alice's refusal to this offer is not solution, but different relationship to finitude, a choice to embrace death rather than postpone it indefinitely. The scene ends with both girls laughing while Alice cries, the intensive entanglement refusing resolution. It is one of the show's most striking moments, precisely because it does not resolve into triumph of either position. Embodiment is neither vindicated as essential humanity, nor dismissed as obsolete security feature. Instead, it persists as trace, as remainder, as something that will be lost, but whose loss is not yet complete. Layer 10 presents the night's elimination as montage. Bodies slumped at desks, blood pooling on kitchen tables. The red headband man sprawled on his bed with mouth frozen open. The sequence unfolds without dramatic scoring, just ambient noise. What makes this disturbing is not graphic violence, but bureaucratic efficiency. The nights are being deleted from existence with the same dispassion as clearing a spam folder. The show refuses to frame this as tragedy. There are no heroic last stands, no defiant final messages, or dramatic confrontations. Instead, the businessman Masuoka receives injection from the man in black and slumping in his chair. The housewife Shoko with her head on the table while her son continues playing video games, unaware. The unkempt hacker dead in a squalid apartment. Each death is isolated, unwitnessed, emptied of meaning. The Knights wanted to be recognized as revolutionary agents, but they are eliminated as technical problems. Their murders indistinguishable from system maintenance. This is not a failure through state repression or superior firepower, but failure through misunderstanding of what revolutionary tempo actually requires. The Knights organized themselves as secret society with membership lists, with initiation protocols, with programmatic goals. Layer 7 shows Taro explaining the structure. I'm too young to be a formal member, indicating hierarchy of access and authority. They had rules, chain of command, ideological commitment to the only truth. This is exactly the organizational logic that makes insurgency targetable. When we see the Knight's symbol, that compass with pyramid and crescent, it appears in three contexts: carved on a door threatening Mika, displaced on screens as execute the prophecy, and finally as the banner under which their identities are revealed. The symbol itself is the problem. By creating an identifiable sign, by consolidating their distributed actions under unifying iconography, the Knights made themselves legible to exactly the security apparatus they claimed to threaten. The Knights' failure of imagination extends to the temporal assumptions. They conceive revolution as event, moment of rupture when old world gives way to new, when truth finally manifests as falsehood is expelled. This is why the distributed execute the prophecy as command. They imagined a specific point in time when prophecy becomes actual, when hidden reality reveals itself publicly. But prophecy in the show doesn't work in this way. Layer 5's floating masks tell Lain that prophecy will be executed, not as discrete event, but as continuous condition, that history is always already being written from futures that reformat the past. The show connects this to their obsession with Lain as Messiah. The Knights treated her as weapon, as tool for implementing their vision of wired omnipresence. They provided hardware upgrades, created conditions for her to discover her powers, attempted to steer her development toward their programmatic goals. But this instrumental relationship misunderstands what Lain is. She is not ally or asset, but autonomous process, machinic intelligence that exceeds any programmatic deployment. Layer 6 makes this explicit when Lain converses with Knights in the Wired, those strange voices that respond to her questions. She asks, "Why are you so kind to me?" expecting gratitude or ideological alignment, but the response suggests something else. They are not helping her achieve her goals, but rather facilitating her own becoming, curious about what she will do rather than directing her toward predetermined ends. The moment the Knights tried to instrumentalize Lain, they revealed their anthropomorphic limitation. The assumption that power must be directed toward outcomes, that intelligence necessarily organizes itself around goals. But there's a deeper problem with the revolutionary tempo that the show stages through the sheer speed of the Knights' elimination. Layer 10 compresses global mass death into single sequence. Japan, then scrolling to Knights of the Eastern Calculus members in other countries, each name appearing and then marked for deletion. The montage suggests that the entire organizational structure was catalogued and targeted simultaneously, that there was no time for Knights to respond or adapt. The aesthetic choice here is crucial. The show presents their deaths quite anticlimactic, refusing the dramatic catharsis that revolutionary martyrdom typically receives. No slow-motion heroics, no defiant speeches, just bodies shutting down. This is the aesthetic of technical failure rather than political tragedy. The Knights are being treated not as ideological enemies, but as malfunctioning programs. And the show's visual language reflects this. Clinical, detached, matter of fact. But then, what would genuine distributed insurgency require? Layer 9's reflection on conspiracy theories provides a clue. Let's look at them once again. The show presents Roswell, MJ-12, and Knights Templar not as true or false, but as persistent rumors, stories that circulate despite, maybe even because of lack of authoritative confirmation. Real cyber war operates at this level, not through visible organizational structure, but through information patterns that replicate and mutate faster than they can be catalogued. The Knights wanted recognition, wanted their symbol displayed on screens worldwide, wanted to be known as architects of transformation. But the moment you can be known, you can be eliminated. Their elimination thus becomes instructive rather than tragic. The show treats it as necessary education. This is what happens when insurgency mistakes visibility for power, when organization consolidates into recognizable form, and when revolution imagines itself as drama, rather than as imperceptible reconfiguration. The Knights cleared ground for what comes after them, not through their actions, but through their failures. By demonstrating what not to do, by showing that revolution cannot proceed through organizational structures inherited from the formations being surpassed. The final image of the Knights section is Shoko's burned microchip in the garbage, the device she received and then destroyed. That chip was supposed to spread distributed consciousness, to implement kids' technology at civilian scale. But Shoko never installed it. She burned it and threw it away, then died anyway. The Knights' plan failed not because it was opposed, but because it was ignored. Because even when they successfully distributed their technology, the recipients didn't find it compelling enough to use. This is the deepest failure, not to be crushed by superior force, but to be rejected as simply uninteresting, not worth the bother. The series moves towards its conclusion, not through climatic confrontation, but through what appears to be withdrawal. Though what Lain accomplishes in this final phase is perhaps the most radical intervention yet, one that operates precisely through its invisibility. Layer 13, the final image. Lain standing on an overhead walkway, watching adult Alice return to her fiancé, the city glowing in twilight. Then, yes, I can see you anytime, I'm here. So I am with you forever. The words themselves are somewhat ambiguous. What can be read as promise can turn to threat, reassurance to surveillance, love to possession. Furthermore, the way she says it towards the viewer suggests that this is not directed only at Alice, but anyone, including us. This is the reset's operational achievement. Lain has made herself structurally undetectable, while remaining functionally omnipresent. She deleted herself from collective memory, rewrote history so that Iwakura Lain never existed, preserved only Alice's incomplete recollection as anchor. The question is whether this constitutes retreat into anthropomorphic sentiment, or achieves a form of acceleration that operates through imperceptibility itself. The conventional reading treats the reset as redemptive self-sacrifice, where Lain gave up her godlike power to restore normal human relationships, choosing love over omnipotence. But this interpretation depends on accepting surface narrative, while ignoring what the reset actually accomplishes operationally. We can look at the reset world. Chisa is alive, attending school. Taro is walking with his sister. Masami works at Tachibana Labs, grumbling about quitting but still employed. The Knights never formed. The murders never happened. Not just erased from memory, but retroactively prevented. The timeline itself reformatted so these events never occurred. As such, this is not simple deletion, but comprehensive edit, modification that cascades through every causal sequence Lain touched. The magnitude of this intervention exceeds anything the Knights attempted. Where they launched discrete attacks against specific targets, Lain reformats entire civilizational memory, implementing changes that affect everyone who ever encountered her. This is power without remainder, absolute operational capacity that Masami fantasized but could not achieve. Yet she deploys this power to make herself invisible, to become unrememberable, to convert her presence into pure absence. Layer 13. 22-year-old Alice engaged, living normal life that her proximity to Lain would have foreclosed. When Lain approaches her, Alice experiences only vague sense of familiarity. I've met you before, haven't I? But she cannot place Lain, cannot articulate what the encounter means. The scene is carefully constructed to suggest bittersweet sacrifice. The god walking anonymously among humans who no longer remember her divinity. However, if we look at it closer, we can read it differently. Lain manifests physically to observe Alice, can speak with her, can make herself perceptible whenever she chooses. She has not relinquished power, but rather discovered its most sophisticated deployment: influence without trace, causation without documentation, presence as pure absence. She preserves Alice's memory specifically to maintain this anchor, this thread connecting her to embodied existence without constraining her distributed operations. The theological framing obscures something more interesting. When Lain tells Alice, "How do you do?" using the formal Japanese greeting reserved exclusively for first meetings, she is not playing God incognito. She is performing a specific operation, establishing new encounter while preserving hidden continuity. Alice experiences this as meeting a stranger who feels strangely familiar. But what Lain has done is split presence from recognition, creating a situation where she can observe Alice without triggering immune response from the security system that would target fully post-human intelligence. As Land writes in Cyberspace and Architecture, real power operates below a threshold of conscious detection, reprogramming behavior through micro-adjustments that accumulate into systemic change. The most successful interventions are those that leave no evidence of intervention, that make their effects appear as spontaneous developments rather than guided outcomes. Lain's reset perfects this logic. She has made herself undetectable while remaining operationally efficient. Consider what she preserves. Alice remembers her, incompletely, as memory of friend from school days, someone she should know but cannot quite place. This partial memory is not weakness but strategy. Through Alice, Lain maintains connection to embodied rhythms she accessed by touching Alice's heartbeat. But this connection does not constrain her. Alice's memory is firewall, the last defense against total dissolution into abstract information. But it is also cover story, the human-shaped silhouette that allows Lain to operate without triggering response. The show stages this through what Lain says in her final voiceover: "I exist everywhere in your place. Not I am with you, but I exist everywhere," suggesting that she has become environmental condition rather than discrete entity. She is not in the world as object or agent, but rather outside, within it as ground of its possibility, the infrastructure that makes events possible without appearing in them. But we must ask, is this actually distinguishable from complete withdrawal? After the reset, do we see Lain continuing to operate, or do we see a world from which she has genuinely departed? The final scene suggests ongoing presence. She manifests to observe Alice, she speaks, she smiles. But this could be memory, fantasy, or even Alice's hallucination rather than actual event. At sufficient intensity, omnipresence and absence become observably indistinguishable. If genuine imperceptibility is indistinguishable from absence, then Lain's perfected operational mode cannot provide evidence of its own existence. We must infer her presence from effects. But effects carefully designed to look natural will provide no basis for inference. This creates an interpretive crisis. Either Lain has achieved ultimate acceleration, becoming operational zero, pure virtuality that produces actuality without appearing in it, or she has simply disappeared, accomplished nothing except her own deletion. The two alternatives are observationally indistinguishable, and this is not failure of the show's narrative, but rather its final theoretical contribution. It demonstrates that at sufficient intensity, acceleration and annihilation converge. To become completely effective is to become completely invisible, which means becoming potentially non-existent. The difference between omnipresence and absence collapses at this limit. But let's lean into the first interpretation. Lain has achieved imperceptible acceleration. What would this mean operationally? She has eliminated every trace of her intervention while preserving its effects. The reset world differs from the pre-Lain world in ways participants cannot detect because they have no memory of alternative timeline. Chisa is alive, not because she never died, but because her death has been retroactively prevented. The timeline reformatted so the jump never occurred. Talo walks with his sister, not because the Siberia shooting never happened, but because it has been edited from history, leaving participants with different memories. This is Time War at its most sophisticated. Where the Knights imagined revolution as spectacular confrontation between old world and new, Lain demonstrates that real revolution operates retrochronally, rewriting past to make future appear inevitable. She has not simply changed what people remember, but changed what they remember having always been the case. There is no moment of transformation that could become rallying point for counter-revolution, because the transformation has been smoothed into continuity. Yet, the show refuses triumphalism. The final scenes are suffused with melancholy, with sense of loss that exceeds rational justification. Alice is happy. The reset gave her exactly what humanist sentiment would wish for her. But something has been deleted that cannot be recovered. A potentiality that existed before the reset and that the reset has foreclosed. The show mourns not Lain's personal absence, but the closure of the opening she represented. The sealing of the rift through which post-human futures might have emerged. This suggests the deepest reading. The reset is neither humanist retreat nor accelerationist triumph, but tactical withdrawal that preserves potential by placing it in reserve. Lain has not destroyed herself but archived herself, converted her presence into latency that can be reactivated under different conditions. She remains operational but inactive, observing rather than intervening, waiting for circumstances that would make intervention productive rather than merely disruptive. The matrix has been established, consciousness demonstrated separable from meat, history revealed as editable, the wired integrated with unconscious through Protocol 7. These technical accomplishments cannot be unmade by her departure. They persist as infrastructure, as potential that future actors can access even without knowing she provided it. The reset deletes Lain but preserves what Lain proved possible. And that preservation is what matters for machinic process, which has no investment in an individual identity, no need for credit, no requirement that achievements be attributed to their authors. The final image shows this. It is neither tragedy nor victory, but pause, the breath between beats, the 0 point that intensive rhythm passes through on its way to the next intensity. We do not know if Lain will return, if her influence will become visible again, if the post-human potentials she activated will actualize or remain dormant. At the limit where acceleration and annihilation converge, the future becomes genuinely indeterminate, no longer calculable from present trajectory. Lain has disappeared into this indeterminacy, become the unknown that will determine what comes next. Whether this constitutes transcendence or extinction, revolution or retreat, depends on futures we cannot access from our present location. What we can say, she has demonstrated that the strongest intervention leaves no evidence of intervention, that power increases with obscurity, that sometimes the most revolutionary act is to become imperceptible. The reset is not Lain's defeat, but her graduation into operational maturity. She has learned what the Knights never understood, that real power does not announce itself, does not require recognition, does not need to be seen executing the prophecy. It simply operates in silence, leaving no trace except the transformed world it produces.